today we're going to talk about the annual planning process. And I don't care how big.
It sounds almost too boring to be.
It does. But I don't care how big or how small your company is. There should be some annual planning process.
Yeah.
And Mike, the first question for you on this is: so what do you think is part of the annual planning process? I mean, you can go all the way from strategic to just get me a budget for the next year. Like, where did you fall?
Oh yeah, I mean, I went through the full evolution. There was a learning curve to enough of these kind of oh shoot moments coming up to sneak up on me once we had a growing operation, probably around Series A time.
Right.
So I had to learn, from you and others what that planning process was. There was no annual planning process until then. So from the more kind of mature company standpoint, walk us into it. When do you even start planning? It's middle of summer right now.
Yeah, I mean, if I were, running a company today, I'd be starting thinking about my planning process.
Today, we're going into June.
I know, it's June.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be entering the planning process. I'd start mapping it out.
So, all right. And your business cycle is on the calendar year.
On the calendar year. And when I say planning process, if I think of the continuum of going all the way from purely assessing strategy, which some companies will reassess strategy every year, and the short end is just crank out a budget, right?
Yeah.
I was somewhere in the middle where I always looked at my planning process as being part, how are we doing against strategy? How are our strategic initiatives? I always wanted my goals to be an output of the planning process and a budget.
All right.
But if I was doing it right, I won't say I always did it right, I was thinking now about the calendar.
Yeah.
And the calendar of the planning process involves when are you going to get a tops-down plan, meaning when are you going to talk with your board, or if you're a public company, listen to your investors and hear what people are expecting on the numbers next year, both the revenue and the cost side.
Okay.
I would be talking to sales, give me bottoms up, what do they think is accomplishable. I'd be talking to my product-oriented teams in the software world, that's, product management and engineering, and, what do you think is possible in the market? What can we launch next year? What's there?
So you're having these conversations in the summer.
Yep.
And you as a CEO are, grabbing one-on-ones with those?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's so not big meetings or anything like that. But good example, I'd go to the CFO and say, hey, we're going to need, just give me the baseline of next year cost by September 1st.
Okay.
In other words, if we just run it next year as is, what's our baseline cost? Where are we at?
Yep.
Just give me that. And usually the CFO would be like, well, if I'm doing my job right, I can give it to you tomorrow because I should have that. Stuff like, which is just what you want. A sales leader, I'm going to probably tell them I want your bottoms up here by early September, because I would plan an executive get together sometime in September.
Yeah.
And that would be one where we would more brainstorm, like, hey, here's what we could bring new to the market next year.
Yeah.
Here's what we could build.
Yeah.
Here's what we could launch. Here's what we see from competitors. Here's how we're competing in the market. Here's what we think the state of the sales team is. Here's what's opportunity.
Yep. All right, now let me ask you this though. So I'm coming at this, even when we had more of an operation going, $1 few million in revenue. The fall, we were on, as seasonal sales cycles. Fall, we were in education tech. Fall semester, spring semester. So if you got me in the middle of summer, I'm not thinking about anything but the fall revenue number.
Right.
And then even right after that, I'm kind of just thinking about the January revenue. How do you, as CEO, pull yourself away from the immediate thing that's right in front of you?
It's literally the job of the CEO, right? It's the hardest part the CEO has, is to know when to pull back and when to fly above versus when to dive in and do. And I will say, having dealt with a lot of early stage CEOs, and you were better than this.
You being one of them.
You were better than most. Is too many of them think, well, I have to do it.
Yeah.
And they jump into too many activities like, I have to do it. I have to be the one to do it. But if you don't nail planning right, and your cycle would have to be off, right? Because you had a fall.
Yeah, right.
You were too busy. You couldn't do a meeting. Then you're in the middle of it. You're a big set. You're generating about 60% of your revenue for the year at that moment. You were done. Yeah. But you had to have the planning process.
Yep.
And there's never a time in the calendar for the CEO and I can just carve this. If you don't have time, then you probably have a problem with one of your executives somewhere, because you're doing too much of someone else's job.
Yeah, good point.
Right? And so that's always the way I look at it. And
when does the board get involved? You're talking about having these light conversations in the summer.
Yeah.
Walk us actually through. It's a little tedious, but on Corey's calendar as CEO, you have these one-on-ones happening in the summertime. when do you get the rest of that team all together? When does the board get involved?
I mean, they go through the team, right? So summer I'm doing one-on-one conversations. I get a bunch of materials, kind of call it early September. Everybody's taking turns presenting at a group meeting in September. We're leaving that with to-do items, and nail this down closer, get tighter on these. Let's prioritize these areas, prioritize investments, which is going to lead to the financial side of the budget being nailed, and asks for headcount being nailed.
Yeah.
I would target a November get together for the exec team to kind of nail down our plan, knowing it's not going to be finalized till January, till we have all the year wrapped up.
Got it. Okay.
Assuming a calendar year.
Yeah.
The board, sometimes without asking.
Yeah.
If you're a public company, you know the consensus that the market has for you. Like when I was a public company, our CFO could tell me by July 1, well, next year they're going to expect this.
Yeah. Okay.
It was over. We didn't have to go to anybody.
Sure.
We didn't have to talk to the board. We would tell the board what the market is expecting.
Yeah.
Private companies, it may be over as well, because you might have investors that came in on a thesis of a certain growth level, and that's just etched in your brain, and Generally speaking, you should be talking to them as soon as early July, or as soon as you get two results.
Talk to the board.
The board.
Okay.
Yeah. And once again, assuming an offset calendar, 2 quarters into the year. I'm halfway through the year.
Yeah.
Here's what it looks like. I should have a little better visibility into the year now.
Yeah. And this is in a situation where you're having 4 board meetings a year?
Sure. I just assume that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But those are one-on-ones.
We were doing 6.
Those are one-on-one calls to board members.
Yeah.
Those are so that's a harder conversation to have with the whole room, unless you have a completely closely held company and only a single firm on board, which happens regularly, right?
Yeah.
But assume 4 board meetings. But after the first half of the year, I'm going back to the board and saying, all right, kind of here's where we think the year is going to wind up.
Yeah. Now,
what do you think next year should look like?
All right, let me ask you this. That's obviously, there's some patterns that had to have taken place for you to get there. I remember the first time I thought I was way ahead of a year. It was like around the holidays, late December. I'm sitting at a coffee shop. I've got my calendar open, notes or whatever. Like, all right, here's what snuck up last year. I'm way ahead of it. You're talking 6 months before even me thinking I'm ahead of
Absolutely.
And the only reason I was doing that in December, that one year, was because things had snuck up on me, and I had always oh shoot, somebody's asking for this. I don't know. I haven't thought about when, whatever the performance review cycle is going to happen, or whatever this rescue attempt on a sales effort is going to happen. So I started pre-planning those. What can go wrong? And maybe what have you experienced yourself or with other CEOs that got you to this perspective of the summer before the next year you start the process?
Hardest part, you get into March or April, you don't have a plan for the year, you can't roll out commission plans, you don't know bonus plans for the organization, you don't know sales targets, you haven't prioritized your engineering or your product-oriented work for the year, you haven't prioritized your market launches. All of a sudden, you're a quarter into the next year, and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do this year.
Yeah.
Now what? And it's purely wasted dollars and opportunity, right?
Right.
And by the way, that happens to companies when things are both going really well or really poorly. When it's going really well, it's like, it's good, let's just keep doing it. Yeah, we'll just hit those numbers next year. And as you know, I'm a big believer in, I want to know why something went well.
Totally.
So I can repeat it again.
Oh, yeah.
And
I've been stumped on that probably by you in the board meeting of things are going well.
Yeah.
It's like, this is going to be an easy board meeting. Well, what's going well?
Yeah.
And why is it happening?
Yeah.
And how are we repeating or doing more of it in those latter 2 questions? Not always the most intuitive answer.
No. And sometimes you're so happy it's going well that you don't inspect.
Yeah. Right.
Right. That it's working.
I got this. It's good.
Exactly. Yeah. What's working? Why is it working? But it's working.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, I had a situation like that where I was a public company. We were in December. We were creating the budget. It was a tops down budget. Let's be very clear. The market was saying, here's your numbers for next year.
Yeah.
And the expense budget, everyone was asking for money. And the head of FP&A came to me and said, so, we got X millions of new spending next year. I don't know how to justify in the board meeting.
Yeah.
And the board will tell us to cut it if it's not clear, which they should, right? If it's not clear.
And that X spending came from kind of bottom-up requests of headcount.
Exactly. And it fit the financial model, but without the detail.
Oh, interesting.
And so it was like, okay, next year we could hit this top line number, hit this profitability number. That meant our expenses can go up this amount.
Yeah.
And then people put in their requests. little horse trading. I was like, okay, now you get that.
Mm-hmm.
But then with the board doing its job, they said, why?
Yeah.
Why are you spending there? What's that going to do? And,
Yeah.
and I know the model works, but
Yeah.
what? And we didn't have it. And all of a sudden we scrambled around for a couple of weeks over the holidays, pulling it together for a January board meeting to approve the budget, right?
Now, have you ever had this where have you ever as CEO incidentally or casually like approved, sort of the wish list and then it gets to the board meeting and it gets cut out?
A little bit.
Okay.
A little bit,
All right.
yeah.
I think I have.
I say you're laughing.
Yeah. It's like, because we're doing things internally and it's like, oh yeah, it makes sense to do this, makes sense. And then the end of year board meeting happens, maybe the revenue numbers aren't where they want them to be, but now you're going back to the team.
Yeah.
Oh, that hire, we're actually not doing that.
Right.
And
Like,
how do you approach that now?
Yeah.
As the CEO.
I mean, it's just it. Honestly, it's like a little crow. All right, we didn't have all this through well enough in advance.
Yeah.
Went into the board. They asked some good questions. Here's what we're going to do. Now, one area I want to ask you about, you were great about setting annual goals, about having OKRs, about having clear direction for the company. When did you start doing that? First off, and what was your process for coming up with those?
Yeah, it's a great question. We came out of, as 4 years of trying to bang our heads against the wall on a model that wasn't working, right? We were trying to rent digital textbooks by the day, required publisher licensing rights. We didn't get there. So for 4 years, it was like this really heavy lift we were trying to pull off. By the time we had pivoted, had, a piece of software of our own, this writing practice tool that we could sell, it was so tough to get the first funding on that. And so I had a list of like 88 VCs, all no's on a small, like $2.5 million Series A. So by the time we got the first like multi-million-dollar, relatively small Series A check, it was actually dependent upon a very specific number that in that case came from the market. Right. So like we've talked about this, sometimes the number you have to hit comes from the market or from the board top down. Other times you're building bottom up and you're usually doing both and trying to figure out where it matches. We just had a number of like, well, if it can get to is about $1 million revenue year, then maybe that's something investable. And so we just came from having that number. And then once we had like the funding down, we were starting with an operating plan that we knew we had to hit, right? So we were always kind of starting bottom up, trying to figure out the math and the operation that would meet the number that, at least for the first couple of years, we knew we had to get, because you have to go from $1 million to $2 million to $4 million. Now, once you're past like, the 5 or 6 million, I think we were collaboratively as a board and an exec team coming up with something bottom up of where we think we can go based on the levers we pull. But yeah, like we were just so disciplined after years of having no traction and like no VC investment that finally it was like I just depended on having everybody know here's the goal and here's the we're OKR, so here's the objective, here's the key results to get there. Because if I can't explain that to you, right, in a way that also the exec team and the rest of the team is on board with, it's like as a CEO, I'm on an island.
So how many OKRs? I mean, start there. Like, how did you decide? Like, is it 5 this year, 2 this year? What did you?
Yeah, I think everybody's quite different. My rule of thumb, I like to have kind of 3 and 3. So there's always like 3 objectives. Even being at the ground floor of your startups, like 3 objectives. No more ideally than 3 key results per. And obviously those will go more granular into team project plans. But I would, open every board meeting, every exec team meeting. We're opening up the OKRs, and it has to just fit almost on that visual. You have to be able to go through really quick. This is red, yellow, green.
Was revenue one of those?
Yeah, it's usually like the growth objective. Toy with the verbiage so that we're inspired behind it, right? But it's growth. Actually, no, we would go product. Then there'd be growth, and then 3 is sort of like experimental. It could be that we're trying, we were trying channel partners, I think, at one point. There might be some operational things, culture,
new market you're opening.
Yeah, it's like catch-all bag for the 3rd, but product, growth, and then catch-all.
And then would you roll that out to every other org early so they can create their roll up to it? Did you just hold to the company top ones?
Yeah, that became like my more core experience with like annual planning. It's the exec team sessions, and we would do usually like 2-day offsites that formed the OKRs. And I tried both ways. Like I would try to come in with blank canvas
Yep.
and sort of conduct like a whiteboard session across the team. Oftentimes I get some feedback there from exec team members of, we're wasting some time going from nothing to something. Why don't you come in with a draft?
Yep.
So then I started coming in. I'm not like dictating top down, here's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
But I have more of the insight from like what the board or the market's going to need to see. So I come in with a draft and would usually ask for that to just get reviewed and maybe some comments on a Google Doc. Then we go into this whiteboarding session.
Yeah.
That's usually a 2-day thing. And as the team was larger, like over 100 employees, it was a core exec team that's like 8 or 9 doing that for 2 days. Then we take it to what we called senior leadership. That was 15 or so people.
Yeah.
Then it goes across the whole company in this big town hall. The town hall is like this almost celebratory, like, we're launching, big, exciting.
Next year it's going to be great.
Yeah, and here's what we're doing. So I'd like to have like the objective stay consistent throughout the year.
Yep.
We tried doing them like trimesters of the year, 3 different ones, but it's hard to change them that many times. So it's like the objectives stay the same. The key results are going to shift, 3 or 4 times a year.
But you effectively had a planning process.
Yeah.
So your planning process, we kind of put it all together. It was not full strategy revisit every year, but it was how do we continue down the path?
Yeah.
Right? And every few years, you probably should do a full strategy look. But at least every year, you got to say, what are we doing next year to continue to get where we're going to go?
Yeah.
It's got to include what are the activities of the business, but then it's also got to include the financial plan behind that.
Yeah.
It's got to have input from the board, not only on the market direction, but also the numbers. Yeah. You got to have your sales team input on what's accomplishable. Finance has got to help you level set where we're at.
Sure.
And then also tell you, where are our options if we're able to hit these numbers? What does it look like?
Yeah.
And you need to involve your executive team. So not only you're not telling them what to do, but you're also bringing them in to the conversation so that they are part of the process and they own it with you as the executive.
Yeah.
And then
to unpack that one, I'm curious your take on this. So the communication of it all.
Yeah.
I think it's like central CEO job.
That's right.
And I like to think of, the sort of late person terms OKRs as like the cover art on the financial plan.
Yep.
We did get more polished to kind of your level as we're above 10 million revenue, right, where it is a financial plan that we're talking about at the board and exec team level. But without the cover art of like, common language OKRs and being able to point to here's the levers within that financial model, now we're just like in this big spreadsheet. So how do you approach the common communications of it all?
I mean, more than that, I'm a big believer in transparent leadership. That'll be another discussion we have at some point. And I believe walking into the organization and just laying it out as clearly as possible, but giving it to them on an understood timeline. We're going to do a kickoff beginning of the year, whether that's virtual, whether that's in person. We're doing a kickoff. At that kickoff, I'm going to tell you what our goals are for the year. I'm going to tell you what our financial plan looks like for the year. And then you're going to have information coming from your managers on hires and your expectations for the year. And it was always, to your point, celebratory meeting.
Yeah.
This is exciting. I would also share with them the results from the year before.
Yeah, the retro.
Yeah.
And
this
always did a retro.
Absolutely. This is what we think we did right, we did wrong.
Yep.
But more importantly was not just the launch, but then it was the constant reinforcement. Love your point about bringing it up every board meeting, every company meeting. These are the goals. This is how we're tracking. I was a big fan of that. I will tell you, some of the organization didn't feel good when we weren't doing good against something.
Yeah.
But we're not tracking well. Do we really want to get people excited? Yeah, we should. Let's be honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
We're not doing good.
Yeah.
We should do better. So.
Well, and I know we have another segment coming up on meeting design that will take, it's not just this annual plan, but it's then how is that conducted through whatever it is, weekly, monthly, throughout the year meeting design. So not time to get there today. I think that's it for annual plan.
That it?
All right.
Thanks, everyone.